Well then, I didn't really mean for this to turn into the Netflix hour. And to think of it, I still have plans to make a video on everybody's favorite gambling anime. And a lot of people have been making requests for me to talk about Arcane. Okay, whatever. Let's just move on, alright, and let's start talking about princesses. This is She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, an animated children's show made in 2018 that is a reboot of the spin-off of the He-Man cartoon of the same name, which explains why some of the naming conventions in the show are deliciously cringe. I mean, seriously, one of the main villains of the show, her name is, I kid you not, Shadow Weaver. Which is funny enough on its own, but it gets even more funnier when you realize that before she was Shadow Weaver, her name was Light Spinner. She changed her name from Light Spinner to Shadow Weaver. I mean, at the very least, the show doesn't really treat it like it's some big reveal. Anyway, for this summer, I should let you know, I know next to nothing about He-Man or any of this world of Eternia or whatever. I'm literally only going off of how this show presents its world and its story. So basically, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is all about this girl, Adora, who was an orphan raised by the Horde, who she is shocked to find out are actually the bad guys. She finds a magic sword while wandering in the woods one day, gets turned into a Super Sentai girl, and then joins the rebellion. The rest of the show basically being about Adora, who can now turn into the Princess of Power, She-Ra.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
Working with her friends Bo and Glimmer. Again, I said the names were on the nose. To try and stop the Horde, and in particular stop Adora's old GF, Catra. Now, my journey to watching this show is kind of odd considering what you're probably thinking. I imagine a lot of you are probably thinking that I watched this show because I watched Nimona, and the guy who made Nimona also made this show. But I actually only watched this show because recently I went on a really long flight and I needed to watch something, and this was just kind of on. Fast forward past a 3-hour flight and I'm already 6 episodes in. Overall, my opinion of the show would be that it is mid. And when I say mid, I don't mean it in that derogatory Marvel sense where something's mediocre. I mean it in the way that I described in the Nimona video, where it has a perfect balance of good and bad qualities. It has quite possibly the best protagonist for a children's story since like Percy Jackson. Adora is likable, funny, interesting, strong, but she also deals with a lot of problems of identity, which are usually the problems that young adolescents go through. And even though she can turn into a giant 8-foot-tall princess of power, she still struggles even when she's in that form. But this is counterbalanced by giving her a rival and a cast of villains that aren't that interesting. Where I'm at in the show, and I must preface that because I haven't finished the show yet, I don't like Catra very much. Catra feels like an attempt to capture a Juri Han type shit-talking villain. And don't get me wrong, I sure do love me some Juri Han in more ways than one. But Juri's not really a dynamic character. She doesn't have a character arc and there's no real depth to her. She just kind of wants power, and that's interesting because she's not the main character of any of the Street Fighter stories. We don't really want to see Juri go through development or change. We just want to see her show up and be crazy. And Catra's kind of similar, where when she shows up, she's this shit-talking, malicious cat girl. But she's also the main face of the villains with her own arc about getting recognized in the eyes of Lord Hordak. Which doesn't really work, because in the scenes where Catra's acting all crazy, it makes her seem like a very flat character, which would work if they didn't try to give her all of this depth. Like, a big point of contention over the course of the first season is how Adora and Catra were best friends, and now they're forced to fight each other. Adora has an actual internal conflict about what this means. But Catra seems pretty okay with this, and that's really the thing about her character. She's just kind of okay with everything. Like, there was a pretty predictable scene in the first episode where Adora comes to Catra and tells her about all the evil things the Horde does, and Catra knows about them and doesn't care. I don't necessarily have a problem with this plot point, but it just kind of leaves her character with nothing really in it. There's no depth, there's no internal conflict. She's just evil. There's never really a moment in this show where I ever really feel like Catra and Adora used to be friends. Except for one episode. Yes, now it's time to talk about the actual episode that was in the title of this video, The Promise. The Promise is episode 11 of season 1 and is one continuous bottle episode. A bottle episode being defined as an episode of TV where it takes place in one location and with a very small cast of characters. The idea behind bottle episodes is that when TV was first getting started and a lot of long-running series needed to make big productions very fast, i.e., say, making an episode a week, they could shoot an episode that takes place in only one location with a very small cast of characters. That way they really wouldn't have to pay a whole lot to get everybody back, and they could shoot it really fast, which meant they had more time to film other episodes. The writers don't have to write a very complex episode. None of the crew have to put in a whole lot of effort to make this. The actors get to do very little, and the producers don't have to pay a lot of money, so it's a win-win. Well, not for the viewers, that is. Yeah, a lot of people kind of hate bottle episodes because they're kind of boring naturally. And it's very obvious that the only reason they're being made is either for lack of trying or lack of budget. Or at least in the beginning, that's why they were being made. As more skilled writers came into fruition, bottle episodes started to become much more interesting. A great example of this would be the episode of Breaking Bad entitled The Fly. This episode is just Walt and Jesse in the meth lab trying to kill a fly. That is the entire episode. And while it might sound boring, it is one of the best episodes because of how it allows the characters to be mined for drama. One of the reasons why Breaking Bad is so good is because it's like a roller coaster of up and down swinging tension, but the story never really stops. This makes the first couple of seasons feel so wild and loose and entertaining. But The Fly is so important because it allows the roller coaster ride to stop, to allow the characters, and more importantly the audience, to look back upon what has happened over the course of the series. And a lot of very interesting drama and symbolism is mined from this episode. But what does this have to do with She-Ra? Well, The Promise does exactly what The Fly does. It's the first episode in the first season where the characters and the plot and the story completely stop. Everything halts so that we can develop our two main characters. You see, She-Ra Season 1 can be broken up into two halves, and I like to call it BPP and APP. Before Princess Prom and after Princess Prom. Everything before the episode entitled Princess Prom is very straightforward. It's a very episodic show that follows the main crew going on adventures to try and either recruit new princesses or meeting wacky characters. Everything after Princess Prom is one continuous narrative where Bo and Glimmer get captured and then we have to go save them, which then ultimately results in the princesses splitting up and the final battle of Bright Moon. This is a pretty good ebb and flow of storytelling, but the problem is it doesn't really allow character development to really be slotted in there unless you're talking about the one episode long character changes that happen in the earlier episodes. In the first couple episodes, almost every character starts with a problem in their personality that then happens to get changed by the end of the episode, like usually how sitcoms work. And then everything APP is all based around this big overarching plot, so we don't really have time to sit with the characters, though there are some really good moments there.
Oh, Glimmer, I'm the one who failed.
I'm not really sure if Promise is technically a bottle episode because it's an animated show, so there's not really a financial reason to confine the characters to one location. But the reason why I call it a bottle episode is because it does what any bottle episode should strive to do, which is that it makes the most out of this confined location and the small cast of characters by delving super deep into the characters that it is portraying. The entire episode takes Adora and Catra through these flashbacks of their past, which not only allow them to see how far they've fallen, but also allow the audience to finally get some exposition about where they came from. And this one, both of their character arcs are perfectly spilled out to us, and even though there's still a lot of people at this point that were probably expecting Catra to turn away from the darkness and become a good guy, by the end, we fully realize that that is an impossibility. This might sound weird because I just spent a lot of time talking about my problems with the characterization of Catra, but I almost think that was intentional in the beginning. A part of me wonders if maybe they made her so one-dimensional and kind of loose in the beginning so that the audience could have a strange interpretation of her. We wouldn't really feel connected to this villainous version of Catra because she felt so fake. And since we're seeing the story through Adora's eyes, we can try and find the best behind Catra, and we can hope for a redemption story for her. But then this episode comes along, and then now that we have the context of where she came from, and we get to spend time with Catra by herself, we see that she is destined to be a villain. And that by herself part is really important because, again, a problem I had with Catra was that she was always just evil even when we saw her by herself. But in here, we actually get to see some conflict inside of her until she finally resolutes herself at the very end to still be evil. This wasn't necessarily a problem I had with Catra being evil. It was a problem I had with her never really choosing to be evil, to never really fully commit to embracing that side of her, and for us to not get the context to understand that. But by the end of this episode, when she quite literally cuts her tie to Adora, it feels earned because we finally have that context. Catra's fall finally feels earned. She can finally be the shit-talking, evil villain rival that we have been waiting to see of her, and it makes sense.
It doesn't matter what they do to us, you know? You look out for me, and I look out for you. Nothing really bad can happen as long as we have each other.
You promise?
I promise.
Adora broke her promise, and it's time for Catra to cut her ties with her. And in my opinion, that's why I love this episode so much. Again, I love characters like Juri Han, or Azula, or Jinx, or Cinder.
I don't serve anyone, and you wouldn't either if you weren't built that way.
Without you, I am nothing.
Okay, yeah, maybe Cinder misses the mark. And while I still would have liked to see a bit more humanity in Catra going forward, I'm finally happy that we finally have the context to understand her villainous side. Like, the last note that I'd like to make about this episode is this final scene.
Oh man, I knew Catra could do it. It's like I was telling you, she is the best friend ever.
Just keep it down. I'm going to bed.
This is such a beautiful way of showing Catra's conflict without saying a single line of dialogue. She may have convinced Adora, she may have convinced Lighthope, she may have convinced Shadow Weaver, and she may have convinced us, but she hasn't convinced herself that she's done with Adora. I really hope the show does more with this relationship, and based on all the fan art that I see, I imagine there's going to be at least a little bit more here.
Lesbian sex!
And I really hope that those of you out there who hate bottle episodes can finally understand what we're supposed to do with them. Because even though this probably isn't technically a bottle episode, I feel like it represents what all bottle episodes should strive to do. Contain a few characters to one location and delve super deep into those characters. No plot, no world, no challenges, no tension, just two characters talking to one another for 20 to 40 minutes. And it should be stated that what they're talking about should be interesting. But, you know, that's something for us writers to handle. And now that we're done with the promise, it's time to launch into the final segment, one good thing and one bad thing, where I state one thing I really liked about the show, followed by one thing I didn't like about the show. Because I was not kidding when I said that this show has a perfect balance of good and bad things. So let's start with, I think almost all of the princesses they recruit are fun and interesting side characters. But Entrapta's villain arc is stupid. The mission to save Bow and Glimmer is very fun and engaging. But the Battle of Bright Moon is very disappointing. Glimmer and her mom have a very interesting relationship, complete with a lot of very good tension, backstory, and conflict. But the mother-daughter relationship between either Shadow Weaver and Adora or Shadow Weaver and Catra is not as good. Bow works very well as the annoying to other characters but fun to the audience type of comic relief character. But Swiftwind is just annoying. I like this scene.
Insolent child. I've come to expect such disgraceful behavior from you. But I will not allow you to drag Adora down as well.
But I don't like this scene.
Because it doesn't matter what they do. The two of us look out for each other. And soon we'll be the ones calling the shots.
And yeah, I think you can probably tell where I'm going from here. It is pretty crazy how much I think about the show and how many times I try to think of something that I like and how many times that's immediately followed by thinking of something that I don't like. This show truly is perfectly balanced, as all things should be. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to single out a specific episode I really liked instead of trying to do a full series review since, well, I'm clearly very mixed. And also, I haven't finished the series yet. It does feel interesting to watch something where there is a perfect balance between good and bad stuff. I'm not trying to say the show is bad in any way, and again, when I say it's mid, I don't necessarily mean it like how a Marvel movie's mid, I just mean that it has good and bad things, and that's kind of refreshing. It's nice to see a show that you can like, but also accept its flaws. And that's about all I have to say on this show. Oh wait, I'm a movie YouTuber. I have to, give this a numerical score so that everyone can boil down my entire opinion into one number. I don't know, She-Ra will get 4 lesbian cat girls out of 8. You decide the value of that currency. Support the Writers Guild.